go ahead and get started. If you want
Great.
to introduce yourself
Yeah.
and why you were running for the position and just your opening remarks.
Good. Well, thank you guys so much for this opportunity. My name is Malachi Boyuls. I'm running for Railroad Commissioner, as you guys know. And, you know, one of the reasons why I'm a current small business owner in the oil and gas industry and former regulatory attorney. So back when I was a regulatory attorney, my job, a little bit like Greg Abbott, was to get up and eat my Cheerios and go and sue the federal government. So we sued the EPA on behalf of Texas jobs and Texas industry, and really we're very successful. So I have a track record of actually standing up to the federal government, and a successful one. And also was able to work with now Justice Alito, who is, you know, as you guys know, Supreme Court Justice, and was with him when he was on the Third Circuit. And one of the Railroad Commission's jobs is to decide cases and to solve difficult issues. And so from Justice Alito, I learned a tremendous amount about not only the process of deciding cases, but then also the principles with which we decide those cases, constitutional principles. He's one of the smartest men I knew, and taught me a great deal. The reason why I'm running for Railroad Commissioner is because the oil and gas industry right now is really driving a lot of what we're doing in this state economically. You know, Texas is the number one oil producer in the United States, the number one gas producer in the United States, and little known fact, Texas is the number 5 coal producer in the United States. If we're talking about oil production, we are producing more oil now than we have in the last 30 years. In September 2013, we produced about 2.7 million barrels a day. That's 30% more oil than we produced in September 2012. People are calling it a meteoric rise, and that right there is the most significant increase ever recorded in the United States. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for you and I? What does that mean for Texas? Well, it means that Texas is going to lead this country to energy independence, and some estimates are that we might get there by 2020. The United States right now is already the number one oil and gas producer in the world, surpassing Russia, and we're on the verge of becoming the number one oil producer in the world. And imagine what that does for our foreign policy decisions and our national security decisions when we can make those without that backdrop of energy. The oil and gas industry right now is also driving our economy. It's responsible for hundreds of thousands of jobs, billions of dollars in tax revenue. We hear a lot about the rainy day fund, and we can't have those discussions without the oil and gas industry. I'm running for the future of Texas, and the industry right now is projected to do great things for the state for years to come, but it's not inevitable. In order to get there, we've got to have somebody on the Railroad Commission who understands the industry they're regulating, and who has a background in actually standing up to the federal government. The reality is this administration, and the Democrats, of course, aren't big fans of Texas. They're coming after us, and they're coming after our oil and gas industry. We've got to have somebody on the Railroad Commission who understands that reality and who knows what it takes to stand up to them and really push them back. Another reality is the Democrats and the liberal establishment is coming after our way of life. They want to fundamentally change the way we do things. They want to take away our opportunity to succeed and replace that with equal results. That's not what we're about in this country. That's not what we're about in this state. I'm a product of the Texas opportunity. I grew up in a small town called Fredericksburg, which I'm sure you guys have heard of. Great place. Grew up with a single mom and 2 younger sisters. And you know, we didn't have a lot. My mom had me when she was a teenager. She worked 2 jobs for as long as I can remember to make sure we had everything we need. But she taught us the values from an early age that underlie that Texas opportunity. That if we work hard, if we have a strong faith, we're going to have the opportunity to succeed. Then it's up to us to capitalize on that. I had the opportunity to capitalize on that and went to college at Mary Hardin Baylor, was the first person in my family to graduate from college, went to NYU Law School, and while I was there, worked with Justice Alito, and now I started a business in the oil and gas space where we're drilling wells, we're putting together royalty and mineral funds. We are working on water disposal issues. So I understand the industry. I want to ensure that opportunity to succeed, is available for my 2 young kids. I have a 5 and a 3-year-old, and is available for the next generation of Texans and for the future of this state. We need a new generation of leaders in this state who can effectively articulate a conservative message to the rising generations and the rising demographics. We don't need to change our message. The reality is a conservative message wins. We need to be able to reach those folks, and I think I can do that.
Okay, great. Thank you. What we'll do is go around the table, and I normally defer to the next person in line, but I just want to touch on something real quick here. Do you think we'll ever get to energy independence, really? Because everybody's been talking about it.
Look, people have been talking about that since the 70s.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think for the first time since the 70s, it's within our grasp. We're producing more oil in this state than, again, we have in 30 years since people started talking about energy independence. We've seen that this increase in production in this state has even shrunk our trade deficit. I mean, so we're getting there. What we need is a regulatory environment, both from this, certainly in the state, that allows for that continued production, that allows us to extract those resources, get them to the refineries, and then get that oil and gas and that energy to our citizens. We need the federal government to stay out of our hair, to quit trying to stop what we're doing with a lesser prairie chicken, with holding up the Keystone Pipeline. I read recently that the review of the Keystone Pipeline has lasted longer than the United States' involvement in the World War II. It has lasted longer than just about as long as it took to build the Transcontinental Railroad 155 years ago. That's unacceptable. So, to answer the question, yes, I think we can get there, but it's going to take a smart regulatory policy in Texas and in states across the country, and it's going to take us standing up to the federal government, standing up to this administration, standing up to liberal interest groups who want to do everything they can to stop it.
I'm sure you're aware one of the big problems in the oil and gas industry, particularly on the exploration side, is the crumbling roads. And what can you do as commissioner to try to address that?
Yeah, you know, that's a great question. You know, and I wish the Railroad Commission could just solve the problem by itself. But the reality is they're going to have to work with the legislature on that, to whether it's funding, whether it's trying to incentivize a lot of these exploration, these producing companies, these independents, whatever they may be, to invest in the infrastructure that they're using. You know, I think we see a couple stories there. In West Texas, we see an area that has been developing these resources for a long time, and they've been able to handle kind of this increase in production, or a boom, if you want to call it. And so the infrastructure there has stood up fairly well. Where we're seeing a lot of the problems is in South Texas, where a lot of this is new. And so it's going to take the Railroad Commission working with a lot of these counties, or these officials in some of these counties where there's this new production, to try to find long-term solutions to infrastructure, working with the legislature to let them know that not only is this good for the community there, but it's good for Texas. If we can build these roads and have the infrastructure necessary for these companies to get down there, to drill these wells, and then to get the energy out, it's going to actually help our bottom line as a state with increased production, increased revenue back into the state. And so I think the Railroad Commission can play an active role. Again, I think it's going to solve the problem. It's going to take a combined effort with the legislature. And the commission and me as a commissioner, I can be a voice in the legislature and hopefully help solve that problem. Be an advocate and, you know, really help them find a solution to the issue.
In one of your answers, you talked about keeping this to be a red state.
Mm-hmm.
The red state, let me see, here it is. Lost my spot here. Oh, if we're to keep Texas red, we must win the hearts and minds of the rising generations of demographics. How do you do that when the Democrats are giving out money and buying the vote?
So I think it's you know, I talked a minute ago about the Texas opportunity, and that's something that's available to all Texans. And I think that's something that the Democrats and this liberal agenda is trying to silence, frankly. This idea that that's a real thing. And so I think one of the things we can do is, you know, have elected officials who have benefited from the Texas opportunity, who have a background and a backstory to say, look, I grew up with a single mom who worked 2 jobs and, you know, made us kind of, which resulted in us kids kind of raising ourselves. She didn't take the free stuff. She didn't take the government handouts. She knew that if she worked hard enough and committed herself, that she would have the opportunity to provide for her kids. She taught us those values. And look, I mean, first person in my family to go to college, went to a top 5 law school, worked for one of the best firms in the country, worked for Justice Alito, and started a business. It's not because I'm special, it's because I was able to take advantage of the Texas opportunity. And I think if you can sell that message to rising generations, look, folks, I firmly believe, want to have earned success rather than learned dependence. And if they have the opportunity to earn that success, they're going to find fulfillment in that. And they're going to, their success may be defined differently than my success. But the opportunity for earned success is very important. And so be able to articulate that message to rising generations and rising demographics and show them, look, it's not just some pie in the sky idea. I'm a product of that. And you can be too. Let us help you. I think that's how you do it.
Railroad commissioner is a misnomer in voting, and I think all the voters really would like an explanation of what are the parameters of a railroad commissioner?
Yeah.
What is your main function, and what can you do and what can't you do?
Well, let me start with what we can't do. We can't regulate railroads, unfortunately, and we cannot regulate trains. And my son, I have a 5-year-old son, and he was very disappointed when I told him that. But what the Railroad Commission can do is several things. It's kind of generically and broadly speaking, the Railroad Commission regulates Texas oil, Texas natural gas, and then coal and uranium mining. And within kind of those broader parameters, what they do is they issue permits to drill wells. They issue permits to drill saltwater disposal wells. They regulate the pipelines in Texas. And we have more pipeline miles in Texas than we have highway miles in Texas. So the Railroad Commission is in charge of overseeing those. The Railroad Commission is also in charge of rate setting for natural gas with utilities. They're the final arbiter on those things. They're the final arbiter on different disputes that we may have within kind of the oil and gas industry. If somebody wants to drill a saltwater disposal well in your backyard and you want to protest that, the Railroad Commission is the forum in which to do that. So that's broadly speaking. Then on the mining side, it's largely a reclamation center. The federal government plays a pretty large role in coal and uranium mining, but the Railroad Commission plays a role in reclaiming that land when they're done with the mine, basically. So to ensure that we're able to not just leave big open pits, that we're able to have great trees and water and provide for our wildlife, which we do. A lot of these companies do a great job in East Texas.
What's your opinion of the staffing, the productivity of the current railroad commissioner?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the biggest issues the commission faces is an efficiency issue, and part of that is staffing concerns. I think a large, I'm not entirely sure what the percentage is, but there's a pretty large percentage of the staff that is going to be retiring out fairly soon. There's a budget for right around 800 staff members, and I think right now there are 700. There are less than 800. The technology at the Railroad Commission is far outdated. It's not nearly as fancy as you guys' website is, and there are going to be changes there. So I think one of the things we can do to increase these efficiencies, and there are certainly issues. There are backlogs in permits. There are backlogs in completion wells. One of the things we can do is upgrade the technology we have available to the industry and to the staff members.
How could that technology be so outdated year after year after year?
Just lack of attention.
When there's so much money available.
So much money. Well, look, I mean, you've got to. There's a lot of money available now, especially because we've had a huge, significant increase in production. I mean, you guys remember probably better than I do. In the 80s and early 90s, we didn't have such a increase in production. We actually started on the downtick in oil and gas production in Texas. Thanks to George Mitchell, who's from this area, we were able to figure out new technologies and new ways of drilling, which actually helped us get out of that hole. And so I think while we were kind of on the downtick, just not enough attention to it, and there wasn't a huge priority, right? And and then we get this increase in activity, and suddenly it becomes important, and we're behind the ball. And so you know, I think it's going to take somebody who understands. Look, the oil and gas industry is the second most technological industry we have, and the agency that regulates it cannot be a drag on new job creation, new economic investment, and then sustained economic growth.
Just to follow on to that real quick, do you know how long the permitting process is for land wells?
For it's you know there are, as you know, various permitting processes. The drilling permitting process is around 30 days or so. I think they're trying to get under 30 days, which would be great if they could. The last thing we need is for any company, I mean drilling or widget making company, to be ready to spend money and hire people, and only to be stopped and slowed down by a government agency. I mean, but when you talk about saltwater disposal wells, especially commercial saltwater disposal wells, the permitting process is delayed around 6 months, if not more. Completion reports, which are necessary to transfer actual property assets, are delayed pretty significantly. So, you know, it varies within the different permits, but I think
Why do you think that is?
I think it's goes back to your question, the efficiency issue. I think there's been, you know, the reason we have a slower or a less lag time on drilling permits than we do on saltwater disposal wells maybe is because that's our priority right now, and we only have so many resources to focus within this entire industry, given the certain technological and staffing constraints they may have, that's where they're focusing on, because they think that's where the biggest economic driver is. So I think if we can ramp up the technology, ramp up the staffing, get leadership on the Railroad Commission who is going to be committed to the commission and provide leadership, provide a vision, and really focus on these areas and make sure we catch up, I think we can catch up.
Follow on to that are the fracking issues. You indicated in your second question that EPA is getting ready to release fracking regulations next year. What do you anticipate will come down from that?
Yeah.
And how do you plan to stop it?
Well, it's I think, great question. What I anticipate, and I think they've kind of showed their hand a little bit. The Federal Bureau of Land Management, the BLM, which is the organization that regulates the federal lands, came out last year with some guidelines, some rules, and what they did was basically increase casing requirements. Really what they did was they copied a lot of what we're doing in Texas. So they are increasing casing requirements, which means different requirements for the cement and the steel to protect the groundwater. They are messing with frac fluid disclosures, which we already do. And what that's doing really is, look, I mean, I say we're doing that in Texas, so what's the harm? Well, the harm is it's a regulation on top of a regulation. So if we've got certain requirements in the state of Texas, and then they're imposing additional requirements in the state of Texas, that increases the cost of doing business. And when we increase the cost of doing business with regulations, that means these companies are going to hire fewer people, spend less money back into the economy, and ultimately push us further away from energy independence. The difficulty with the EPA doing this is, look, the geology and the different regions in Texas are very different. So, what works well in West Texas and the Permian may not work nearly as well in South Texas in the Eagle Ford, which may not work nearly as well in East Texas. If there's that much geographic diversity within our state, to say that the EPA, which is going to be a nation-run, or it's obviously a federal agency, and it's going to have a nationwide rule that regulates oil and gas production nationwide, it's going to be virtually, if not realistically impossible to have a rule that is efficient in all these different regions. Because if you think about the development of resources in Texas is very different than the development of resources in Pennsylvania, which is very different than the development of resources in Colorado. And I think that just is ultimately inefficient. And look, we believe that states are better suited to regulate the states.
So how do you pursue that argument? If the EPA comes in and tries to regulate it, how do we block that?
Well, look, there's several ways I think we can do it. I mean, one way that people don't talk about really is the 10th Amendment. I think that's one thing we can do. So we can sue, and the Attorney General's office has sued the EPA several. I mean, if you ever hear Attorney General Abbott talk, he likes to talk about how much he sued the EPA. The Railroad Commission can, and the commissioners especially, can play a role in that, in advising him on where are their vulnerabilities, where can we attack and be successful. Having been a regulatory attorney and actually doing this as a career for a while, I know well where they're vulnerable. I know the process of actually going up against them, and having worked for Justice Alito, I've seen behind the road the decision-making process, and so that's a kind of an all-encompassing experience that can be pretty effective when trying to push back through a lawsuit. Another way we can do it is actually through the EPA's regulatory process. I mean, administrative law works in a way that they propose a rule, they receive comments, and they fight within kind of the agency. The Railroad Commission has got to take the fight to the EPA. We can't sit back and wait for something to happen and then only sue. We've got to fight them within the agency, and I've done that successfully. And the final way we can actually step up and push them back is, look, we've got a lot of energy producing states in this country, you know, I mean, we can band together and really stand up to them as a unified front, whether it's, you know, encouraging the elected officials, the DC officials from Texas and Colorado or New Mexico or Oklahoma to really stand up and push from within Washington, or stand as a cohesive unit to say, look, we got this, we understand how to regulate our state better than you, and we're not going to stand for it. And if anybody's going to do that, Texas has got to lead the charge. And if anybody in Texas is well positioned to lead that charge, it's the Railroad Commission.
Okay.
So in the question about assuring residents of safe drinking water,
Mm-hmm.
your suggested way of assuring them is to have the Railroad Commission to assist this process by hosting town hall meetings across the state. Tell me your thinking and why having the Railroad Commission do it as opposed to the oil companies do that.
We found recently that, or over the last several years, that the oil and gas companies aren't the best PR people in the world. They may develop resources and drill wells very well, very successfully, but they may not be the best. And look, the Railroad Commission, I think, can play a role in educating the citizens on really what the process looks like, what fracking is. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation about what even the fracking means and how long it's been around. And look, I personally think that if the less government acts, the better, probably. And so rather than over-regulating an industry that's really driving our economy and a lot of what we're doing, we can spend some of our time out in answering questions and really reaching out to the grassroots, hearing the concerns, trying to address those concerns. And if we don't have a solution or we don't have an answer to their question, let's go find an answer.
So do you agree or disagree with the thought that any project that the government does is less efficient than the private sector?
Any project the government does is less efficient than the private sector.
By definition. Is that, do you agree with that, disagree with that?
I think probably there are very few things that the government is even meant to do, and everything else they don't do. They should either stay out and so I think they're definitely, yeah, absolutely inefficient. I mean, with bureaucracy, with the approval process, I mean, the free market is one in which government does not fit well from a getting things done standpoint.
How confident are you in measurements on fracking? For companies that are fracking, is there a reliable way to measure where the frack's going and to keep it from going into the water table?
Well, I'm fairly confident. I think when obviously, you know, that when we're fracking wells, we're doing it well below the water table. I mean, we're doing it thousands of feet below the water table, and so it's very difficult.
Other water zones that may be around that.
Right. Well, we're doing. It's very difficult to measure a crack, right, and to figure out where that's going to go. I mean, I think the technology has improved such that we are able to track that, of course, and then to record that and and then frack on a consistent basis.
How do they track it typically? technology available that tracks that?
Yes, sir.
You own a business that, oil and gas business, I guess, royalties and so forth and so on.
We're kind of like country lawyers, we'll do just about anything.
So by being the head of the railroad commission and having your own oil and gas business, would that indicate that there's a possibility of a conflict?
Great question. I would not be actively involved in the business when I was, if I'm lucky enough to win. I will put my interest and have no involvement in the business. So, now of course, either fortunately or unfortunately, I've got to work for a living even while running a campaign. But if and when elected to the Railroad Commission, my sole responsibility, my sole job is the Railroad Commission.
Along that same line, anybody in oil and gas is a billionaire automatic. I mean, that's just
Yeah,
an understood thing.
yeah.
Uh,
I wish.
So obviously, so this is probably gonna be a step down for you.
Oh, well, look, I mean, it depends on how you measure that, right? I mean, I think it's hard to value service, and I was a religion major in undergrad, and I kind of have a service bone in my body. I planned on going to ministry, and so I think I find great value in servant leadership, and that's why I'm running for this office. Look, I obviously am deeply invested in this state, and really care about the success of this industry for the success of the state. But ultimately, the reason why I'm running and not just kind of supporting somebody else, because I'm very concerned about something completely outside of the Railroad Commission, and that's just the leadership of the state and this country. We need leaders who are committed to being servant leaders, which to me means putting others and doing what's right ahead of ourselves, who are less interested in self-preservation or self-advancement and more interested in standing on conviction and principle, even if it means you lose, even if it means that you might lose your next election. And so I find great value in that. Financially, I may make a little bit less money, but the railroad commissioners get paid far more than the average American. I mean, it's very, very difficult to complain about that.
So, and obviously, we all look for people that profess like you, that, you're really, in my heart, I want to serve the people. Along that line, is this a stepping stone for you?
No, it's a great question, and not the first time I've been asked that, of course. Look, the reality is, first, let me just talk like the practicality of it. The Railroad Commission has not been a very successful stepping stone of late. We've seen a couple who, it's a statewide office, who tried to run for more local positions and lost, not even finishing in the top 2. So it's not a very successful stepping stone for that matter. And second, I actually think the Railroad Commission should be and could be one of the prime destination jobs in the state. Think about everything that's going on in the state, and a lot of it's driven by the oil and gas industry. We have a significant void of energy leadership in this country. I think Texas has got to lead that way, and if anybody in Texas is going to, it's got to be the Railroad Commission. So if you want to serve Texas in a way that's impactful, if you want to serve Texans in a way that can help ensure a bright future for the generations to come, for the future of Texas, I don't know, no better job in Texas than this.
Okay. What can you explain who some of the groups are that you listed under
Sure.
the civic, political, or union organization, and
Sure.
specifically Vitae Foundation? Just a brief overview.
Okay.
Hope for Nations, Global Outfitters.
Yeah.
I can come back.
Yeah.
around to
So
this.
it's Vitae Foundation. It's a group. It's a pro-life group. My wife and I have contributed to them. We sponsored a table. Michelle Malkin was the featured speaker there, and so we bought a table and it supported them. Hope for the Nations is a missionary group. My wife and I have supported some friends who are missionaries, one in Morocco and actually several in Morocco. And so Hope for the Nations started at a church called Hope Chapel in Austin, and it's where my wife went to high school or to college at UT and went to that church. And so a lot of and that's just kind of their missionary arm. And so we supported several missionaries out of that. And then Global Outfitters is the same, is a missionary group.
Okay, what about Next Worldwide?
Same, sorry. It's Next Worldwide is a organization. It's actually based in Texas, I believe Grapevine or North Texas. A friend of mine was a college. He led college mission trips to Costa Rica and other countries, and it was a support-based job, and so we supported him.
Okay, and United Ministries?
I believe it's the same. I can't remember specifically who. I should know this. Sorry, who of our friends we supported there, but it's more of a missionary group.
Tell me what you know about Agenda 21.
Agenda 21. I don't know. I'm not. Kathy Adams is supporting me, and Kathy Adams is one of the experts on this, and Greg Parker is another guy who I've talked with on Agenda 21. I know it's an effort for I guess the United Nations and to really get their hands in the United States. Kind of more of a global. It's more of an attempt. I'm stumbling my words. It's more of a kind of a global attempt to globalize kind of what we're doing here nationally, to get the global fingers within regulations in the United States. I'm not the foremost expert on Agenda 21.
Do you see any concerns with that and oil and gas? Or?
Yeah, I think it absolutely is a concern. I need to study on Agenda 21, of course. But I think anytime somebody's going to try to come in and redistribute wealth, essentially, the oil and gas industry is going to be a prime target for that. And when they see that the United States is the now number one oil and gas producer in the world and on the verge of being the number one oil producer in the world, it's going to be a prime target for anybody. Anything that increases the authority and the power of the United States within this global economy, this global community, is threatening to any sort of group that wants to at least equalize control.
Right. And how do you think we counter the push in the discussion of global warming? And do we need to be looking at alternative technologies for fuel? And
The discussion of global warming, people talk about it like it's a fact, right? What do we do about global warming? Well, what do we do about the boogeyman, right? You can have all your theories, but you've got to figure out what the problem is. If we're gonna, we can't develop solutions in search of a problem, right? And so, in terms of alternative energies, look, if we can find a source of energy that is cheap and that is readily available and renewable, that can handle the energy needs our energy needs, the base load of a state like Texas, great. But to do so in a way that, again, a solution in search of a problem is just not smart. So we can't do anything about global warming until we understand the facts and science around it.
But CO2 keeps increasing.
Well, the CO2 levels in Texas have not continued to increase at significant rates. We've actually done a pretty good job here.
Yeah.
And we've been developing more resources, more oil and gas in this state than we had in the last 30 years.
So is that the reason for temperature decline then?
Well, now it's right. Look, it's global warming. Well, gosh, it's really cold out now, and so maybe it's global cooling. Well, maybe it's just climate change. Let's just figure out what we're going to call it. Look, I don't want to belittle anybody for thinking that climate's changing, because it probably is, but it's not. It's by virtue of cycles. We've had climate change in this world for since its beginning, right? There's just cycles. So
Okay, right.
So Texas is doing really good. There's this this huge industry, and my understanding is Railroad Commission's job is to kind of protect in that industry, the Texans from huge disasters like the water getting corrupted, or, I mean, so there's property rights, and then
Yeah.
there's managing companies. What are your thoughts on striking the balance between those pressures? Because, you know, the Agenda 21 was nothing more than a big catastrophe in that industry, so they can come down and justify a bunch of regulations.
Well, let me just say, you know, in terms of striking a balance, really there is no balance, right? I mean, Texas and its citizens, Texans, are always first. So it's not trying to figure out how can we get both the industry and Texas on equal playing field, and how can we make them both first? The reality is Texas and Texans are first, and Texans are successful often when the industry is successful. But at the end of the day, property rights are very important in this state. You know, they're kind of, if we didn't have property rights, we'd all be serfs, and that's not what this country was founded on, and it's certainly not Texas. We've got to make sure that we're developing these resources so we can continue to grow economically, continue to create jobs, continue to get closer and closer to energy independence, but we can't do it if it's ultimately harmful to our citizens. In Texas, we've been developing oil and gas for decades, and we do it better than anybody. But we've got to consistently review what we're doing so we can ensure that we're continuing to produce energy, but we're doing it in a way that's ultimately beneficial to Texas.
So is the industry pretty good about self-regulating themselves from a safety standpoint?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think so. You know, it's hard to trust. It's hard to trust government, and it's hard to trust big business, and really it's hard to trust anybody, maybe. But I think they do a good job. That said, I'm not sure that we as a citizenry can say, all right, well, they do a pretty good job, so let's let them do it. We've got it. There's always going to be a bad actor who's going to try to cut corners to make some money. They want to spend less and make more, and I think we risk a couple things with that. We risk ultimately hurting Texans in Texas, but then we also risk that bad actor, that handful of bad actors, whoever they may be, ultimately harming an industry that's doing a fairly good job, and who actually, you know, these executives, these guys who are drilling these wells, these women who are working in the field, they live there too, and so they're not going to do something that risks their own health and safety, and they certainly aren't going to do anything that risks their kids' health and safety. And we don't want to, you know, see a problem that is confined to 1 or 2 or 5 or whatever it may be, operators or companies, and then overcorrect and ultimately serve as a bigger drag on continued economic and job growth.
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm starting to feel a little like a serf with the property taxes.
Well,
The last 20
That's
years.
right, and that's, you know, that's unfortunate, and we've got to get back to this, this idea that the people are in charge, right? It's a government of we the people. It's not a government of you and you tell us what to do. You know, the government officials have got to understand who they work for whom they work, and it's not for the governor, it's not for the lieutenant governor, it's for you guys. And we've got to get back to a model of, again, I talk about it a lot because it's very important to me, but servant leadership and really understanding who's the boss.
21 minutes.
Okay, including 5-minute close, so we got about 15 minutes of questions. All right. Shoot.
We've talked about technology, how far behind it is in the Railroad Commission, as well as other interviews we've had in different departments also. Behind on the time frame on getting permits and so forth and so on. What's it gonna take to get all that corrected, budget-wise? Is that going to increase the budget, or?
No, so that's a great question. You know, this last legislative session, the legislature actually allocated an additional $24 million to the Railroad Commission to do this. So the process is underway. Little known fact though, the company who won the contract is a company called CGI, who you guys may have heard of, who is in charge of rolling out the government healthcare website. So
I thought that's what it
it
was.
sounds familiar, doesn't it? So,
Who in the hell
Vaporware.
approved that?
well, the Railroad Commission, I guess. It was before that whole debacle, of course, but I think there have been debacles in the past. So, in order to answer your question, it can't cost any additional money. Taxpayers cannot pay any additional money. So, that means the Railroad Commission and the commissioners themselves are going to have to take a very active role in. So the technology and the database upgrades are going to happen in stages. So we've got to make sure that we keep a very close eye on what happens in every stage and make sure they're doing what they said they're going to do and that they're doing it at the price they said they're going to do it. So it's going to be a very committed and a very hopefully intense oversight process to make sure we do it right. So it doesn't cost any more.
And then
Having
over
come
time.
from the oil and gas software business myself, I've seen a lot of scope creep in the past, so.
Yeah.
uh,
We want to make sure that we do that in a way that serves the industry well so we can make sure they are running efficiently, that provides information to Texans. So if anybody's interested in where the wells are or where they're going to drill a disposal well, they can go on there and it's intuitive to them. And in a way that just stays on budget. We can't spend any more money on it.
Yeah, if there's not an increase, or decrease in time and permitting process, you'll be getting calls directly from my wife.
Yeah,
She's involved in that process.
Really? Well.
She is. Larry, oh, you're done, that just went over 2 minutes, I'm sorry.
No, I was within my 2 minutes. You kept it going.
I was following on.
Okay.
Okay, also, individuals to whom you've contributed, put you on the spot here.
I wish I had more money to contribute more, but
Perry Presidential Campaign, Ted Cruz for Senate, Dewhurst, and Legacy, what is the Legacy Political Fund?
yeah, legacy.
How do you rationalize the others too, because of course they're Republicans, but not necessarily.
I think the
all
Dewhurst.
conservative.
The Dewhurst one was I think $50 to go to a young professional event
Oh,
years ago, so it wasn't a significant increase. But I had to answer the question, so
yeah.
it was. I think again,
We'll let it slide.
I literally think it was $50 to go to a public or to like some event in Dallas years ago. I've known Ted for a long time since I got back from law school. I've known Ted before Senator Cruz before he even thought. Well, he was probably thinking about running for office, but the gears weren't rolling. So obviously helped him. Governor Perry, frankly, thought he had the best shot and he was going to be the best candidate in 2012. With what we've done in Texas and the other possibilities, I was very excited about him running for president, frankly, and did what I could to help him out. And then Legacy Political Fund is a group. It's a group that was started not really started in Dallas, but started by some guys in Dallas who wanted to try to influence the political process, and it's kind of a faith-based group. So they wanted to try to influence presidential elections and primarily presidential and senatorial elections nationwide, and with issues on the social conservative side.
Going back to the system upgrade perspective, so who would be in charge of making sure that that technology upgrade is conducted properly, that we don't have this massive overrun that,
Yeah.
that's a problem not only with Obamacare, that's been a historic problem throughout the IT industry.
Absolutely. Well, look, I think ultimately the responsibility falls on the railroad commissioners, the 3 elected officials who are ultimately responsible to the electorate.
Mhm.
I think probably the executive director is and has played and will play a pretty significant role in that, just because it's his job to executively direct. But again, the ultimate responsibility has to fall on the shoulders of the railroad commissioners, and because they're the ones accountable to the people, and they have every right and every authority to take an active role and an active interest in that issue. And if they don't, then
So what will you be looking for?
Well-
Either in who's managing it for you, or in you directly? getting
yeah.
involved?
Look, I will be the first to admit I'm not an IT expert or a grammar expert, obviously, but I'm not an IT.
Pretty good job.
I'm not an IT expert, but I want to make sure that based on the terms of the contract, what they said they were going to do, that is actually being done, and that I was appointed by Governor Perry to a board, and as in my position was the chair of the budget committee, and I've had experience and really actually enjoy combing through budgets and figuring out, okay, do we need this? What do we need here? And where can we cut? Where can we be more efficient? And so looking through the proposed budget, looking through what they're doing and you know, where they are in that whole process is something I really look forward to, actually.
Yeah, suggestion here, have milestones, have them put milestones all the way through
Yeah.
and verifiable as you go.
Yeah.
Detailed and verifiable milestones all the way from.
And I'm hoping that's kind of
Yeah.
what this process lends itself to, with you know, with this process of them rolling it out in stages. You know, that it's already kind of something that they're thinking about within the milestones, and we can kind of assess on a stage by stage basis. But even within that stage, I don't want to get to the end of the stage and find out that they've spent $1 million more than they need. I don't want to get to that stage and find out they spent $100 more than they needed to, or that they weren't able to accomplish everything they accomplished. So even within the specific stage, I think you're right. Having milestones and goals is going to be very important.
And maybe hire a consultant to watch that does know
Need a
what they're doing
job.
from an IT standpoint. Not anybody, but I'm kind of out of the IT aspect now, but I've been.
One of the things that worries me with consultants, though, is, I mean, a lot of times they're needed, and but I don't want. Federal government likes to spend money and have people come in and tell them what to do. Consultants, and I just don't want a bloated budget on people who are kind of duplicating themselves. Sometimes duplication is necessary, just to kind of double check and really make sure you're doing what you need to be doing. But
Sometimes you need a project manager
Yeah.
if you don't know the details.
yeah, no, but that's right.
So, you've got 2 kids, 5 and 3, I think, something like
Yeah.
that, you said. So dad needs to be home a lot for those 2 little ones. How are you gonna balance the, Austin and, yeah, it sounds like a pretty demanding job. You need a little overtime or a lot of overtime?
Yeah, it is.
Proud.
Yeah, one of the, I think the job kind of lends itself well to that, though. I mean, under the Constitution, executive officials, including railroad commissioners, actually have to move to Austin. So there's no commuting there, so I'll get to go home to my wife and kids and be home with them without having to stay in Austin for Monday through Thursday and then go home Thursday through Sunday.
So you live in Austin now?
No, I live in Dallas.
In Dallas.
Yeah. And the way you balance it is make it a priority. I think it's something that you have control over, and the job is going to be demanding, and I want to make sure that I do the job and that I do what I'm hired to do by the people of Texas and do it as well as possible. But also, you've got to understand, when I was an attorney, we had to bill every 6 minutes of our life, basically. And in order to do that in a way that allowed me to get home to my kids and allowed me to eat dinner with my wife, was to be smart with my time. Good time management. I learned that as an attorney. I'm learning that as a business owner now. I'm learning that especially running a campaign, where I'm in College Station earlier today, Houston today, Midland tomorrow, back in Dallas tomorrow night, and being able to manage your schedule well, where you're running a good campaign, that you're being diligent in kind of the task that you set out to do, that you're running your company in a way that is responsible, and that you're being the dad that you need to be. I think that's very important.
Explain the executive structure of the railroad commission. I'm saying executive, you know.
Higher, like the organizational structure.
Yeah, how do you guys work together? Who has what responsibility?
Yeah, so that's, it's interesting with the Railroad Commission, with the Open Meetings Act and the Public Record, or the, whatever it's called, I can't remember, the Public Records Act, whatever it is. Open meetings and something, I've worked on this before, but the commissioners actually can't talk to each other unless they're in an official meeting and then they give notice, because 2 commissioners is quorum. So there's no interaction outside of the actual meetings that are open to the public between the commissioners. And they're, it's not like the different agency, the different kind of departments within the agency are assigned to the commissioners either. There's kind of equal responsibility, equal authority among them. There's so the structure is there are 3 commissioners, 1 is a chairwoman, and that is not elected. It means no kind of increased authority. It just simply rotates among the 3 commissioners, and it generally goes to the person who is up for election next, is how it's traditionally worked. Equal authority, and under them is an executive director who kind of is the chief of staff within the commission. The commissioners themselves have an office and a staff, so it may be a chief of staff, an attorney, and those staff members can actually communicate with other commissioner staff members. And then underneath there are different departments. So there's a pipeline department, there's engineering department, there are different departments. There are, I think, 11, I believe there are 11 district offices spread out among the state, and that's where the vast majority of the government, the Railroad Commission employees are, so it's spread around the state. And then the central office, has kind of a lot of the department heads.
Got about 10 more minutes, including the 5.
Okay. You touched on the property tax, and I don't remember if you addressed this or not on Brian's question. But in one of the questions, do you support or oppose a business tax to reduce property taxes? I don't think, did you go there? And you said that you would oppose a business tax to reduce property taxes because businesses already pay significant property taxes. How would you reduce property taxes? And what would you put in their place?